So when I was about 6, I wanted a new bike. And my parents said something to me. I see now that it was wise. It was something like this: you don't even ride the bike that you do have. I think if I remember correctly, I thought that was stupid. I think was what I said to them, because this new bike was red, and the bike that I owned was yellow. So obviously, I needed a new bike. It made perfect sense. And then a few years later, maybe elementary school, I had, many of you don't even remember what this is, but the original Nintendo, right? And yes, this is my era. And I wanted whatever the new gaming system was at that time. I'm sure it was like, I don't know, Atari was the next thing, I don't know. But I wanted the new one, and my parents said to me, but you don't take care of the game you do. I lost games and I sat on them and broke. You don't take care of the games you do have. Which again, if I remember correctly, I think I said it was something stupid. And then, right around high school, I think it was, I wanted these new running shoes. I had some running shoes, but these were fast-looking running shoes. I wanted to wear them, and I told my parents I would really like these running shoes, and they were like, but you don't run ever. And I tried to explain to them, but because they don't have the fast ones, if I just had these, I would. And again, they said no, and again, I said that was stupid. Until very, very recently, actually, when Debbie and I were traveling, there was a bike that I saw, and we walked by it every day. It was this shop that sold electric bikes, okay? And what was really cool is it looks like a normal bike, so you could ride faster than everyone, and they would never know that it wasn't you. And I just thought, I'm begging Debbie, wouldn't it be awesome if I had this electric bike? It's electric. It goes for you. You just look like you're pedaling. And she said, Jay, I just want to make sure, don't you have a bike now? And I was like, yes. And she was like, do you ever ride that bike to school, or do you just drive your car? And I said that was stupid. You're seeing a trend here. Throughout my life, well, I've got this thing, but I want this new thing because it's shinier, but I'm not really able to use the thing I had in the first place. And I think maybe we can relate a little bit. And also in church, I want us to, I think this is true in church. What I've noticed is we have a language that we use in church. I like to call it churchese, and we think it's normal, but people outside of church are like, I don't know what you're talking about. And we say things like, you've heard this, in my church, I just really want some meat. I want meat. Don't give me that milk. Like, I want meat. And where, people are sort of quoting this, this letter from Paul about meat and milk, and when you're mature, and that's what we're saying. We want milk, or what we want meat. But I'm thinking, what I always want to ask when somebody says that is, does that mean like you've nailed the earlier ones? Like, you've got the ones from Sunday school that milk, like, love one another? Have you nailed that one, and that's why you want the meat? Or is it because you're just tired of that sermon and you'd like to find something maybe shinier? You'd like the red bike. I think maybe sometimes we just need to play with our old toys until we get good at that. And I'm looking at this, and granted, there's some ambiguity in this. It's a little bit of a confusing passage. But it seems like the writer of 1 John is saying some of the same stuff. And I'll tell you what I did. I wrote what I would call Trey Wince's Amplified International Living Version of this section. Just to kind of break down at least these first few verses, like say verse 2 of 11, what I'd like for us to notice. And it goes something like this. Dear brothers and sisters, I'm not making up any new ideas. This is the same stuff we've always tried to be about. Here, let me put it this way. If you think that you're good church folk, but you can't seem to love one another, you're not good church folk. But if you can figure out how to truly love one another, as far as I'm concerned, you nailed it. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Really? Is that everything? What about all the local community stuff? Or what about, church mission programs, or Bible studies, or robust theological programs, or a good strong youth ministry, or hospital visits, or all that other stuff about church? And I'm glad you asked, in your minds. Right? You said that. Because as we look at this last section from what Melly just read, this 15 through 17, this hate the ways of the world section, I think we get a little bit, it's kind of like last week when we talked about why in the world love McLean, and love Kinda, and love Carly, and love Chris, and love Money too. Like, I'm a multitasker. That's good. It doesn't seem that difficult to me. But I think that what it is telling us is that the ways of the world and the ways of loving each other are opposed to each other, are basically at their root opposed to one another. And it's almost as if it's saying that the things that we do outside of this church color the ways that we do things inside of this church. It's also as if it's saying the ways that we treat one another inside of this church color everything in terms of how we live outside of this church. See, because when I was little, I had a rule that I made up in my own head, and it was, the food on my plate cannot touch. Okay? Your green beans sat here, your macaroni and cheese sat here, and whatever they had low and the kids' meal sat on the other side. And they may not touch because that's gross. It's gross for your food to touch. That's where I felt like, until my cousin said, it's going to the same place. Like, I don't understand. How is that gross? Like, it all ends up, you don't have 3 stomachs. You're not a cow. It's just how it goes. And I remember that was mind-blowing to me when I was 8. I just thought, well, you know, you're right. It is all going to the same place. But in our culture, things are set up pretty well for compartmentalization. And this wasn't always the case. Maybe just 100 years ago, things were pretty interwoven. You went to church with like your butcher, and so if you didn't pay your butcher bill, then it got weird during church. Everybody sort of knew everybody's business, and communities tend to be smaller, and you didn't really compartmentalize your life like that. You couldn't separate it out. However, today, things are set up pretty well for that. Today, we can have a school life, and a sports life, and a church life, work, online, friends, and none of that stuff has to touch. But this passage seems to say you can separate that stuff all you want, but it's going to the same place. And what I do in my school life actually affects how I interact here. What I do in my work life actually affects how I interact with my wife. Last semester, and I know this may be hard for you to believe, last semester I got a bad grade. Bad grade. And I've actually had a lot of time to think about this, and I think I finally put my finger on why this happened. It went kind of like this. I didn't put any effort into the class, and I tried to skate by with just enough. Even did those little tricks, like kind of buddy up with the teachers, so maybe they'll give you the benefit of the doubt and it became great time. Apparently I wasn't a good enough buddy. But I remember when I got my grade back, all I wanted to do was apologize to Debbie. And I didn't even know why. That doesn't make sense on paper. Why you get a bad grade and you want to apologize to your wife? There's no connection there. But as I read this, I think that there might be more of a connection than we realize. Because I think what happens is, if I am doing a thing, a part of my life, a part that I say is important, and I'm doing it halfway, and I'm trying to skate by, and I'm trying to do the least I can, and I'm just not giving my best, it feels like that bleeds into the rest of my life. And when I went home, it felt like I am not offering my best to the things I've said are important in my life. And I can't imagine that doesn't bleed into my marriage. Because we do what we practice. It's a simple fact. My coach used to always say, like, my coach would yell at us in basketball for just kind of shooting shots however we wanted to, when it wasn't like during practice or between practice. He would say, game shots at game pace, or game shots at game spots at game speed. That was the rule. You always take game shots at game spots at game speed, because always you are practicing. Whether it's called practice or not, come game time, you will play like you've been practicing. And so it may have just been a blank paper that I didn't spend any time with, but it felt like I was practicing a lifetime of mediocrity. And I get it. Maybe that's a little dramatic. But I think how we treat these desires of the world that these last few verses talk about affect how we love one another. That old stuff, that milk that we skip over. I am a believer, and you kind of have to be careful what he says. I'm a believer in fasting, like that old school biblical fasting thing. And part of the reason you have to be careful is because today there are a lot of really broken stories of But I remember I would go do like a ridiculous, really, I don't even recommend it, like week-long, go to the woods kind of fast, disappear for a while and don't take food, and eventually start to hallucinate because you get so hungry and you haven't seen people for a while. It was an interesting experience. But the point is this. I remember every time I would come out of the woods, I would never have heard some voice out of the sky or anything like that. But I would find that I was more patient with people. I would find that in terms of personal disciplines, if I set a goal, I would hit it. I would find that in terms of sins I continually struggled with, or tendencies I had toward gossip, or toward anger, or whatever it was, I had a little more control over that. And I couldn't figure out why for the longest time. It feels like this: if we're always practicing something, and I would take a week out where my body says, I'm hungry, and you know that panicky feeling, like I'm hungry and I want food now. You have that when you don't eat for a week. It happens. And for a week, my body would scream, I want food now. And I would just say no. And you get good at that. You get good at your body saying, or your mind saying, I want this thing and I want it now. I feel like doing this. And you just say no. Until you get back in real life. And it bleeds into your patience. It bleeds into how you tell your body no when you know that there's something you shouldn't do, but you just would like to, or you'd like to talk about that person, but you know in the back of your mind you shouldn't. Well, there's a way of this world, just like the end of this passage says. And then there's an unnatural way. So that's why I think this whole love one another line is kind of a wild card. It's kind of a catch-all. It's really like a dirty trick, because it feels like it's one instruction. We'll love one another, and you can skip over it. But actually it seems to sort of bleed into our whole lives. So here's the deal. We are, I would say, a pretty exciting moment in Kingston's story. You honestly would not believe some of the ideas that people are tossing around. And I'm certain in the next few years, Kingston will probably take over the world. One ministry at a time. You will have heard about us anywhere. And that's exciting. It really is. We dream a lot. But I think this is the time, especially for that reason, that we need to step back and go, well, what about this loving each other thing? Because if we can't nail that, why in the world are we going to take over the world? When Debbie and I were doing our premarital counseling, and we did a lot of premarital counseling, they gave us a book, and one of the books gave us sort of this rule, just basic rules for your first few years of marriage, and one was you make one change a year. So like your first year, your change is getting married. That's a big enough, that's a significant change. And then, maybe you add one thing to your life. And so that's what we did. We got married, and that was it. We actually blocked big sections out of our week where we wouldn't let that was part of our calendar, we wouldn't let anybody touch it. We'd say no to work, we'd say no to whatever, because we just wanted to have a year where we just sort of learned to be with each other all the time. And then the next year, we uprooted from our lives, quit our jobs, and moved up to Princeton, New Jersey, and started a new life in school. That would be our second-year change. And we did that, and yet again, we sort of blocked times out where we were going to spend time together no matter what, because we know we're in a new environment, and that it's an important change, but it's a stress on the relationship. And so for a year, that's what we did. We got used to this scenario. We got used to just being with each other in different contexts. Well, now we have a different scenario. Now we've started here at Kingston. And again, we'll spend a year trying to get used to this before we just try too much again. Well, I think it's a little bit where we are in Kingston, because we're looking at a lot of exciting things. But I think if we don't spend this year cultivating relationships, that bandwidth that can handle a little bit of stress when you try some real ministry, when you try to stretch yourself and offer something, I think we'll make a mess, honestly. And so this year you're going to see a lot of things that are like supper club. And you're going to see lunch after church, and you're just going to see these little ideas that look like hanging out. And my hope is, in the process, we see something actually much more theological. We see something much more important. We see ourselves building a foundation that will allow us to have the relational bandwidth to serve others. And I love this little poetic section in the middle, because while I certainly don't claim to understand why it goes right here in the middle, this is verses 12 through 14. What I do know is that systematically the writer goes through every stage of life. It says, doesn't do a great job of being gender inclusive, but you get the idea. I would like for us to remember that nobody is safe in this process. That we all have homework, that we walk out of here. This is our homework assignment, to walk out of here and take inventory. And say, what is that part of our life that we like to not, touch the other parts of our food? This is the protected area, and we don't mess with it. Take inventory and note that nothing is safe and nothing will not affect the way we love each other. And believe it or not, may we remember that how we interact with our families and our friends and our co-workers, and how we write our papers, and how truthfully we pay our taxes, and the places we spend our money